where I felt so hopeless and helpless and just not myself, that I was like crying. I'd come home from school and I would just cry, and I wouldn't want to come out of my bedroom, and I didn't want to talk to my mom about how I can still kind of struggle sometimes. In this video, I'm sharing for the first time my personal experience with depression and how I pulled myself out, and also how I can often still struggle today. And the reason that I want to talk about this is I think sometimes depression is overlooked or minimized and often misunderstood. People using the term like, I'm just so depressed, when they're having a down moment or maybe had a rough day or something didn't go the way they wanted. And I think when we use terms that way, we can feel like, oh, you know, they're drawing more attention to it, or they're calling it out, or we're being more open about mental health and mental illness. But I think it can also sometimes minimize those who are really struggling, or cause misunderstandings where people think depression is something that it isn't. And depression isn't just feeling bad or having a bad day. Depression is much more than that. When I first felt depressed, I think I was maybe a sophomore, maybe a freshman in high school, and I want to say it was lasted off and on up until my senior year of high school, which is part of the reason, if you don't know, why I started therapy at the age of 15. My mom and dad had gone to couples counseling, and we went as a family, and I loved it. It was something that I really needed at the time, and so I continued to go. And part of that was brought on by the fact that, I was going through puberty, right? It's like early high school, like out of middle school. It's that time frame in your life. I first started like having crushes on boys, and not all of them had crushes on me or didn't like me in the way I liked them, or girls were gossiping, and I dealt with bullying off and on, probably in middle school mostly, but working into like my freshman, sophomore year of high school. And all of those things happening at the same time just put me in a dark place. And the first thing I noticed was actually that I had kind of like body aches and thought I was coming down with a cold, and I was tired a lot, and went to the doctor. Nothing was wrong. And because my mom and dad had started therapy and I'd gone into family counseling, that was when I branched out, and I think her name was Sue, was my first therapist. But that was kind of my first foray into taking care of my mental health and struggling with a mental illness. And it got so bad that there was a point where, and I don't want to get emotional, try to pull it together, where I felt so hopeless and helpless and just not myself, that I was like crying. I'd come home from school and I would just cry, and I wouldn't want to come out of my bedroom, and I didn't want to talk to my mom about it, and she would like check in on me. And I remember her sending flowers to school to like try to brighten my day. And that was just, my mom, she does her best, and she's, ugh. But I really struggled, and it was getting to the point where like nothing I could do in therapy was really making it any better. And so I went on medication for about a year, 6 months to a year. And probably that, in combination with weekly therapy, really helped pull me out. And I was fine and feeling good for probably the next like 4 or 5 years. And then maybe not even that long, because it was my sophomore year of college, and not to tell you too much about my life, but I went to Pepperdine for college for my freshman year. And right before I was supposed to go into my sophomore year of school, my mom's dad, who was he was offering to pay for my schooling as a loan with, I think, little to no interest for me, as because he could afford to, and I was super grateful. And then right before I went into my sophomore year, he decided that he didn't want to do that anymore. But I'd already said no to all of, the loans and grants and stuff like that. And so anyways, I had to withdraw from Pepperdine for a year, my sophomore year. And I was in a really dark place that year, and it was really hard being pulled away from what I had known and what I'd worked so hard to get to, and not being able to, I had to get all the financial stuff in order. So I was able to go back my junior year, or actually the summer before, but for that year I was in Seattle going to a community college so I could keep up with my courses. And I was definitely not a happy person. I wasn't in a good headspace. I was super, super down. I've told many of you on Patreon live streams over the years how I was so unhappy that one of my closest friends at the time sat me down, and she was like, I love you, but you're really hard to be around. And it was a wake-up call that I needed, because I wasn't in therapy. I wasn't taking care of myself. I was just like venting, and I was angry all the time. And for me, depression affects, so like I said, it gave me body aches when I was younger. I don't get that as much anymore, but I definitely will want to sleep a lot. I'll be extremely tearful. I will be unmotivated, and just everything just seems to take way too much energy, more than I have in me, and I won't be hungry. Like my hunger fullness cues are completely off. And so those are things that were all affected during this time. And I remember when my friend told me I was hard to be around, I remember thinking like, how do you think I feel? Like, I don't like being around me either. That's why I'm so upset, and that's why I'm so, there was so much turmoil in my life and a lot of change that I felt like was completely out of my control. And so I got back into therapy, and I haven't been back on medication since that period when I was in high school, but I want everybody out there to know that if you feel like that's something that you need, there's no judgment, there's no stigma. It's just another tool, another resource, another way to help ourselves, right? As we're struggling, sometimes we can't even get our head above water enough to get a full breath, right? And so I definitely have felt that way. And I went through that, and I felt like I pulled myself out. I got a wonderful therapist at Pepperdine. Her name was Rebecca. I saw her for free through the school, and it was a godsend that I saw her and built that relationship, because I saw her at least once a week and sometimes twice a week as my dad's health declined, and ended up passing away when I was in graduate school. So flash forward another, let's say 4 or 5 years, my dad passed away, and I was grateful that I had her. And I remember being really grateful to Sean for putting up with me, because at the time I would get like really sad, and then I'd get really angry, because anger is always like my protective emotion. And we would go out, and like if I had like 2 drinks, you guys, I would be like angry about anything and everything, and I was like inconsolable. And again, I didn't want to be me. I didn't like how I was. I didn't like the person I was turning into, and I would think about it after the fact, either the morning after or even in the evening of, and I'd be like, what are you doing? And I just felt completely out of control. And I don't know if that's anyone else's experience, but it was really a godsend for me to up my therapy sessions and to start really talking about what was upsetting, because it was the stuffing down that was causing that anger to come out, because I felt so, I don't even know what the word is. It's like I felt so dysregulated. And so like I was a passenger in my own life, like I wasn't in control. I was just like riding along. And I think taking the time to like process through losing my dad and going to graduate school and like trying to make ends meet, because if anybody knows, I put myself through school, and those like loans come due quick, and interest rates are like terrible, and I feel like they just screw over students. It's really terrible. But coming out of that was just so incredibly stressful, and I didn't have any other way to cope. And so that was probably, honestly, the last real bout of depression that I had. And I have to assume that that's because I've been in more consistent therapy. And yes, I know I moved to Texas and I haven't found someone that I've connected with yet, but I plan on it. And I think for me, the way that I kind of stave it off and keep it at bay is by taking breaks, by connecting with people that I care about who really get me, and by consistent therapy. And I think giving myself the space to really vent and talk about all that's going on inside of me allows me to feel less alone and not so out of control or dysregulated, because I think that in the end is really what gets me. And then my whole system feels affected. Like I said, like my sleep and my hunger fullness and just like my motivation. And so anyways, I'm not sharing this to make you feel bad for me or anything. I'm doing okay. I just get tearful. You know me, I'm a crier. I get tearful when I talk about things that are really personal. But I want you to know that depression doesn't always look the way that you think it's gonna look. It's not just a sad person. I know a lot of times we think it's just someone who's sad. Like I was actually angry. And if you'd met me during those times, you would think, Katie's just like fiery. Like she's just a feisty personality kind of person. No, I was depressed. I was just that's just how I expressed it to people out in the world. And taking care of myself and prioritizing therapy. And I know it can be expensive for people, but like I said, I went to therapy for free when I was in college. There's also like, I used to work at this clinic called the Center for Individual and Family Counseling in North Hollywood. A lot of people saw me for free or for $20 a session. There are ways to get help when we need it. There's even, BetterHelp. I have a link in the description to BetterHelp. There's Talkspace. There's Crisis Text Line. There's a lot of ways for us to get help when we need it. And I would just encourage each and every one of you, if you're feeling any kind of way where you don't feel like yourself, you don't have to wait till, like I did, until you start feeling like you almost have a cold and you have body aches or you're not sleeping and not eating. Like, we don't even have to wait for that. If you're just feeling not yourself and feeling a little down and a little overwhelmed, it's okay to reach out. I wish I'd reached out sooner rather than later. And now, as a 38-year-old, I feel like I'm finally kind of getting better at that, where I don't wait as long and I reach out more quickly. And even when we were moving and stuff, before that, I'd already asked a friend, I was like, hey, I don't really love my therapist anymore. Can you give me any recommendations? And she gave me some names. Again, obviously we moved, so it didn't really work out, but we don't have to wait. It's good to have somebody you can reach out to and talk to, because I really think that's what's ended up saving me in the long run. But I'd love to hear from you. Are there other symptoms that you feel I didn't mention that apply to you? Can you share that in the comments and let people know? Because sometimes I think also we don't take the time to take stock of how we're feeling, and so we can overlook things for a long time without realizing how connected they are. And also, if there's other ways that you care for yourself. I know I just mentioned like therapy, taking breaks, and medication being beneficial for me, but what helps you? Are there other things that you found to be healing or helpful with your depression or any of the symptoms? And I also don't want to end without mentioning that for me, and this is so lovely / horrible, but depression and anxiety tend to be like close cousins. And so while I might not have any more depressive symptoms as an adult, I definitely feel more anxious. And so that's something different that I have to deal with, and something different that I have to be aware of. And that's why I talk about the body shakes all the time, because when I start feeling overwhelmed and I start sweating and my heart starts racing, those body shakes are a godsend. Also writing things down before I go to bed so I don't feel like I have to keep thinking about them, that's been helpful. Again, therapy, friends, family, things like that are just another layer, and therapy again, to be helpful for me. But yeah, that's me. That's what I've struggled with in my life. And I believe, to be honest, that going through something like that makes me better at my job and makes me a better therapist. I know some people think, oh, I can't trust a therapist who's had mental health issues themselves or struggles with a mental illness. I think it makes us better. I think then we can have more empathy. We actually understand at least part of what people might be going through. And having gone to therapy, I feel like makes me better, because then I know what it's like to sit in the waiting room and flip the switch to let them know I'm there, and fill out that paperwork and have them ask what brought you in and how does that make you feel, and all that stuff that they ask that sometimes you're like, what does that mean? I think it's helpful to have that perspective as well. And so don't think that if you want to have a future in the mental health field as a professional that you can't because of mental health issues, because you definitely can. And I think it makes us even better at our jobs. Yeah, I'm sure I'm forgetting some things. I took a bunch of notes, but I just rambled off the top of my head. But I hope that was helpful. I only share because I hope that it reminds you that you're not alone, and that things can and will get better. We just have to be aware of it and enlist some supports as we need them. But I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your week. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.